Thank you everyone for joining us. It's great to see a big turnout and for also joining us virtually. So I'll be sharing ANBU UK's work, and we'll begin with context setting for the Tamil community. I do want to say, please do look after yourself where you need to, as I'll be talking a little to Sri Lanka and the Civil War, which may bring up different emotions for different members of the group. So if you need to mute, if you need to step up, please do, and use the support team as well. So the three structures that's also followed in the needs assessment is thinking a little bit about collective trauma and migration, and in turn intergenerational trauma. And this is quite a brief part of it, and then we'll go into the needs assessment analysis. So collective trauma is, the first definition is, it's a psychological reaction to a traumatic event that occurs to a whole society. Not just a historical event, but actually a memory log. So what differentiates it from individual trauma is that it goes beyond the first survivors that it actually happened to, but the memories and the processing of the trauma lives on through time and space, and different diasporas, different people and generations process it differently through storytelling. So the Tamil community in particular has experienced collective trauma through colonialisation and the Civil War. The Civil War in particular is quite a recent memory, as managers mentioned, within the Tamil diaspora, and in 2009 is when it ended. So the Civil War occurred as a Sinhalese Buddhist nationalism was taking over, and that led to a lot of marginalisation of other communities that didn't identify as Sinhalese or Buddhist, which was also more government-led more than anything, and legislative acts such as the Citizenship Act of 1948 and the Sinhala Only Act in 1956 disadvantaged a lot of communities that didn't identify with the majority government that they wanted to. So this impacted all sectors of well-being, including education, employment opportunities, and then had a knock-on effect on the diaspora, which I'll talk to in the immigration part. It's also important to mention that there was resistance, and I think there needs to be a lot more dialogue about how we talk about it, that there was resistance from the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, LTTE, and they'd hoped for a separate state of the Tamil people. And there were Tamil sanctions for this, including anti-Tamil programs resulting in further cultural genocide through burning Jaffna Library and the killing of Tamil people with little protective intervention for civilians, i.e. those who weren't actually involved in the conflict themselves. So the impact that we're still noticing lives on. And I think there's something about reparative measures and what lives on families through fragmentation. A lot of people lost a lot of people, but also a lot of people had to fragment in order to survive and have better opportunities in life. And this feels really important to add, because by the time when we're thinking about a survivor, there's all this history behind them that's important to consider as to what we are working with when we're working with trauma. And additionally, when we think about access to care in healthcare or otherwise, it's important to think about what is thought about when the word Tamil comes out. Is there already a negative connotation to terrorism placed because of what happened? And so these are all little subtle discriminations and microaggression that feels important to bear in mind when thinking about what access there is to support. So next, migration. So a lot of people might relate here within their own community if there has been migration that's happened, but also given Sri Lanka's past and current context, many people did decide to migrate to other countries, and migration to a new host country can bring its own set of challenges, and this can include, but is not exhaustive, of not having adequate access to healthcare, jobs, education systems. And these can often be limited by refugee and asylum seeking statuses, which create further barriers to seeking help. And there's also another sense of discrimination and alienation faced by those migrating. So this could be racism and othering of people from minoritized backgrounds. And more often than not, this has another compounding impact on mental health. Another important part to consider is also what happens in family systems when migration happens. So traditionally, if whoever was earning the money had quite a high skilled job in Sri Lanka, this might not be the case by the time they arrive to the host country. So they might be underpaid, and they might also not be matching their skill level. And this can then impact on self-worth and self-esteem, which then impacts the presence in the family unit, how much they can be present. And these all, again, feel really important to think about, because by the time a survivor arrives for support, this family dynamic is already at play. And they will then move on to intergenerational trauma, because
just to make sure we're on the right slide, is it collective trauma, migration, and intergenerational trauma slide?
Yes. Can you see all three?
Yes, we can now. It might be easier if you turn your video off because I think it's freezing at times.
Okay, thank you. Let me know, and please do shout out if I'm also talking too fast. If I break up, will you let me know as well? I'll change networks.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Am I okay for now?
Yeah, I do think that turning your video off will help though.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
That's okay. Before I go into the needs assessment part, I'll check in as well. So the last part of context setting is the intergenerational trauma element. And this is understood as unprocessed trauma being passed on from one generation to another, consciously and unconsciously. So many Tamil people that left their home countries may be still parting with grief, loss, and fragmentation from their families, which can have a significant impact on their well-being. And different generations can also present their difficulties in different ways. For example, generations that were born and raised in host countries might better be able to label anxiety, depression, and PTSD. However, this can manifest as somatic symptoms in the generation above, such as body pains and headaches, which is some research that Nibarna has done recently in 2019 and speaks to that. And this, of course, calls for more culturally sensitive, inclusive ways of working and being able to adapt to that, which we at ANBU UK hope to do. I am going to move to the needs assessment. Can you hear me okay, or am I still breaking up before I go?
Perfect.
Okay,
really,
brilliant.
Really fine. Thank you.
No problem. So take a breath for a second, we rest onto some tree imagery, but as a lot of people before me have alluded to, we've been working on the needs assessment since 2019, so pre-pandemic, where life was very, very different. Since then, we've been able to put a lot of information together, and Venetia, who's speaking next, has been a tremendous help in helping putting together a report to share for best practices and knowledge, and for also helping to direct and guide ANBU UK. I also really want to give credit to Sabitha and Gemma. So the upcoming slide is their brilliance and creativity, and the clarity is all theirs. And I'll be speaking a little bit to this. So child sexual abuse is a topic of significant importance, and according to the World Health Organization, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 13 men globally report being affected by CSA. The reporting rates of CSA are broadly low across all ethnicities and cultures, but reporting rates are notably lower than expected in British South Asian communities. There's a number of reasons for this, which includes being denied access to reporting structures, inaccessibility of resources available to survivors, and cultural barriers around honour and shame, as mentioned. And with regards to the British Tamil community and CSA in particular, there is a notable lack of evidence-based literature. However, there is anecdotal evidence collected through the work at ANBU UK and other related organisations. And so the ANBU UK research team performed a needs assessment in 2019. We did use the definition of CSA. We put that in the questionnaire, and that was used from the UK government policy on CSA. The aim was to understand the current knowledge of CSA within the Tamil British community. And there were 4 themes that we were hoping to think about. One was the knowledge around CSA. What was the baseline data for this? We also wanted to know how people felt about talking about CSA. And thirdly, we wanted to know about disclosures. What was the baseline? How did reporting go? How did people feel about it? And finally, we also wanted to know a little bit about the healing process of survivors and what their thoughts were and what the community's thoughts were, so that we could shape some of the organisation as well as support what we were already doing. So the needs assessment was developed as a questionnaire, and there were 30 questions, and we created it both in Tamil and English, and we had a Google form that was circulated, and a lot of people filled those in, and we also had paper copies which we handed out at events. And we distributed it through social media platforms as well as mailing lists, and we kept them anonymous, so no details were taken. And at ANBU UK events, we left a box and people could put it there so that we remained anonymous there. And we collected this data from February and March 2019, so quite a while ago. So we had an amazing 123 responses, which felt like a first of a kind and still feels like that. And we had a gender split of 72% female and 28% male. And we had most people ranging from 18 to 34 that filled out the questionnaire. Over half of the respondents were from the UK and a further 21% from Sri Lanka, with a high proportion of those born outside of the UK residing in the UK for more than 15 years. And so when we think about the first theme that we wanted to find out, apart from demographic data, was knowledge. So 22% of respondents would consider themselves a survivor of CSA, with the vast majority being female. Over 60% of respondents knew of someone who was a survivor. And this was certainly eye-opening, because 1 in 5 respondents, that means, considered themselves survivors of CSA. And it is noted that ANBU UK did the sort of data collection, so people that were filling that out, we might be representing a higher proportion because of the organisation itself. And so it might not be representative of the Tamil community at large, but the figure does tie in with the World Health Organization statistic of 1 in 5 women globally. And even though we did give a definition, there were 7% of respondents who were unsure if they'd consider themselves survivors. And this was helpful information because it also shone light to, do we need more clarity about how we're defining that in different communities? And interestingly, another thing that we found was that those who identified as survivors were more likely to know another survivor than those that didn't identify as a survivor. We postulated that would a survivor be more likely to initiate conversations about CSA, and there's more awareness between each other. But again, further research point, we think, but quite important. And moving on to, we use a Likert scale, so you'll see a lot of strongly agrees to strongly disagrees in the next couple of slides. The data suggests that there is a high proportion of awareness of CSA and its impact on adult development and relationship, with most people ranging from strongly agree to agree. And we also noticed that this dropped though. They were less informed on where to source more information or how to support survivors. It's noted also that the predominant age range was 18 to 34, and so this might not be representative for all generations, but there was a significant drop from awareness on the previous slide to providing support. And when we think about survivors, nearly all responders agreed on, or strongly agreed with the statement that it's important to talk about CSA, which is a good thing. So that means that ANBU has a purpose in its space as well. And the majority of respondents support the idea that children should have access to sex education and be taught appropriate and inappropriate touch, which is helpful to know as we work from an adult lens and working with parents. I think this is also good to know about what we should be thinking and focusing about for the community. And when we then looked into levels of comfort about who talks with who, we found the results quite staggering, actually, that most respondents felt relatively comfortable talking to friends. However, this switched up to the other way around when thinking about family. So the data suggests that there's still some way to go in raising awareness around the community with family conversations. And we also wanted to take into consideration a selection bias of respondents. We can hypothesize that the percentages may be lower for the community as a whole when it comes to talking about CSA in the family in general. As we spoke a little bit about collective trauma earlier, it feels important to add that collective healing can also be possible through exploration within the community and perhaps somewhere to work on further around family support. And then the third last part, when we're thinking about disclosures, there was a markedly different response. So the data suggests that participants were most comfortable in supporting emotionally, but were far much less confident with general and legal processes within the community. So the legal process in particular is interesting in itself, as it raises the question of, is there enough accessibility for minority folks and a culturally adaptive way of working alongside cultural stigmas about authority figures? And I think the IMCANT report speaks a lot to this. And our results also indicate that there is a desire for more knowledge around supporting disclosures from an emotional standpoint, as well as the practical and legal aspects. So there is a desire to learn and desire to want to know. It just also gives us a baseline of where we need to do a bit more work. And interestingly, the top two mediums for receiving this information were emails and or workshops. So it was noted that one was more of a passive medium and the other was more active. And this has really helped shape our understanding of how to deliver this information in the community in order to cater for everyone. So last section of the needs assessment focused on healing, transitions and well-being, which is where we got our name for the group. So 55% of respondents who would not consider themselves survivors felt that it was important that the community be involved with the healing process. The top three options were chosen as 20% of group sessions, they said, 18% preferred sessions and workshops, 20% raising awareness, 18% of groups and workshops, and 15% noted that sex should be spoken about and not as a taboo. We then split the data to survivor responses only to see if there was any difference in this. And so this figure rises to 61% when considering survivor viewpoints. And it noted that all male survivors opted for community involvement, which is really interesting. We had a small number of male survivors respond to this questionnaire, but I think it still speaks a lot. And the data also highlighted the need for raising awareness in the community around CSA, with a much more high importance placed on this when comparing non-survivor data with survivor data. It's hypothesized that the need for this is to create a safe environment for survivors to disclose their experience and take steps to heal. And finally, ANBU UK runs outreach workshops already, and they're aimed at starting a discourse around CSA in the Tamil community. They have been delivered across different community spaces, as Shabina has mentioned. So there is also further scope for future work alongside survivors in tailoring the workshops to meeting the needs of survivors and the community as a whole. The data does suggest a culturally specific and culturally sensitive therapeutic intervention is needed in order to benefit the community, given the historical context. We also noted that 6% of survivors said that they don't want the community to be involved, which is also really, really important to note, that there needs to be diverse ways of interacting with survivors and holding all of those positions in mind. And that brings me to a close. These are some of the options that we provided as support systems, and these were sort of picked up by respondents. It's amazing. We've done psychotherapy groups, yoga groups, and art therapy, and perhaps it's also given us direction of what we might want to explore further. So we would like to run next year more therapeutic groups and have survivor-only spaces in 2023, but plans are still in place. So our hope for sharing this research is to inspire, collaborate, and to share knowledge on projects around psychological healing and well-being across the South Asian community. And we really look forward to hearing from the upcoming speakers. Thank you.